Hi, everyone. Julia here, recording this on July 6th and July 7th in Australia. Well, it's almost July 7th here in Portugal. And the year's 2024. This is Julia from Simplicity Revealed YouTube channel. And I have Jerry Marzinsky and John Avery here. Cherie Hatfield is having internet issues. Maybe she can pop in later, we're hoping. But yeah, the three of us are Mace Energy Method practitioners. And the way I discovered Mace Energy Method was through Jerry Marzinsky. And some of you already know his story, but I'll let you tell us how you found Mace Energy Method, Jerry, and your background.
Well, my background is on the front line. So I've been a clinician for over 40 years. I'm a retired licensed psychotherapist. I've been working with and studying the thought processes of psychotic, criminally insane patients in some of the biggest hospitals in the country. I'm a commercial pilot. I'm a certified scuba diver. I ride motorcycles. I was assistant scoutmaster. I won the Arizona State Meritorious Service Award. I won a teaching award for abnormal psychology in Pima College. Um, my background is in psychology. I got a master's degree in counseling, rehabilitation counseling, and I spent 2 years in a psychology PhD program. So I've jumped through all their friggin' hoops. And I'll tell you, when I came out and got onto the front lines, none of that stuff worked. None of it worked. The counseling techniques, the further you went. Now, you know, Rogers Rogers' counseling technique was it was good because it reflected back to the person. But as far as getting at the cause of what's causing psychological illnesses, neither psychology, counseling, or psychiatry is getting at the cause. They're treating symptoms. Oh, I feel bad, or I feel depressed, or and none of them are getting at the cause. None of them are fixing the cause. They're just doing the symptoms, and treating the symptoms doesn't make anything. It doesn't cure anything. And when it comes to psychiatry, I don't think they want to cure anything. They just want to keep dishing out these super expensive medications that cost between, especially for people who are psychotic, cost maybe between $800 and $1,000 a month to stay sane on these drugs. And they don't cure anything. You stop taking them and the voices and the psychotic symptoms, 90% of the time come back. So they're just treating symptoms. And here in the United States, they've cut research for schizophrenia down to a dribble, which is more proof that they really don't want a cure for schizophrenia or any mental illness. They want to just, big pharma is behind all this. They're making, what is it, $14 billion a year selling these psychiatric drugs. We're talking $1 billion a year. So they don't want people like us around. We would interfere with if we grew too big, we would interfere with their money train. Because what we do actually cures the problems, and they don't come back, which is hard to believe after spending all this time in counseling and all the in-service training that I've had to take over the years, and it just got worse in the PhD program. Those people were more disconnected than all the levels under them. It was more like a cult than anything else. Well, you're about to join our cult, so you got to think like us. I didn't want to think like them. It hurt my head. So I've never seen anything work like Mace. Nothing. So I think, I read the books and I was able to put together enough of it to make it work with the people I was working with. And then somebody wrote me and said, I have somebody I think you need to meet. And he said, at the worst, she would just be a jolly old grandmother. And I went, well, that's odd. That's very different from the kind of emails I usually get. So I'm like, something in me said, well, you ought to check this out. You know, if the worst it'll be is a jolly old grandmother, I mean, what's all that about? So he sent me Cherie's address and notified Cherie I'd be contacting her. And here was Cherie, you know, and I was suspicious to start with. Um, I saw that this stuff was working, and she said, well, why don't you consider being a Mace practitioner? And I said, well, why would I need to do that? It's working with what I have. And she said, well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And it kind of was. I mean, there was a lot more to it than I had control or had mastered at that point. But I did see that it worked. And what's so good about it is, you don't have to jump through all the goddamn hoops that John and I did. We had to go through all this college garbage, to get to where we are. I mean, and I didn't get a whole lot out of what I hated about undergraduate psychology is you couldn't check anything out. They would feed you all this stuff, you had to regurgitate it back, and you had no way to see if it was true or not. You can't walk into a mental hospital, you can't get into a psych ward, you can't walk into a mental health center and check this stuff out. And then what I found out is that 80% of what psychology publishes in research is garbage. It's not replicable. A big research organization in the United States did that and found 80% of it was just garbage. It wasn't useful. It wasn't the truth. And this is what they're putting out in the universities. It's like publish or perish. So they will just publish anything. It doesn't matter as long as they got the university's name on it. And when you get up to the PhD level, it is publish or perish. Those guys have to publish stuff, or they're discounted. They're not going to move up the ladder. And the stuff they were teaching us, the counseling techniques. I mean, I don't know about you, John. Do you find those things very useful? All these counseling theories,
No, not really, Jerry. It's like, as I said, it can give a little bit of help, but there's never anything permanent about it. It's like you push the problem away, make them feel better, perhaps for an hour or two, or a couple of days, or even a week, and that's where the Mace came from. It was like John Mace and I had the same experience, and we just said, what we're doing is nice for people, but it's not permanent. Something's missing, and that's how they kept searching. That's how Mace appeared, because we just kept searching. Every time John and I met up, we'd talk about anything new and that sort of thing. No, definitely. Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of what I did with the schizophrenics too, and the voices. Is like, just looking and testing and until I found out what these things were. But it was just, the same process of just piecing together things over the years until something started working. Yep. And what I had in the prisons was a group of prisoners who were schizophrenics who would tell me in real time what the voices were saying. Okay? And out came a list of some 23 patterns that these voices were running.
Wow.
Now the psychiatric mafia says these voices are hallucinations. They're like the Egyptian priests of old. They just get up there and we hereby declare that the voices are hallucinations because we said so and we're psychiatrists. They haven't done any research into it at all.
Yeah.
So when you start looking into it and these patterns start appearing, hallucinations don't run patterns. And anybody can see these patterns for themselves. They can go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. They're published there. It's not a biochemical imbalance or a genetic imbalance, like they're trying to blame all mental illness on something biochemical or physical. And that's one thing that the Mace Energy Method has that none of these other counseling systems have, is there's a spiritual component to it, which has to be, because we're spiritual individuals. You can't cure spiritual problems with drugs.
That's for
And
sure.
and I found it fascinating that, when John said the spirit or the being, as he calls it, is a very powerful, positive, energetic force in the human being. And I found that even more interesting when he talked about positive absorbs negative. So um, the movement of electricity is from negative to positive.
Yeah.
And how he pieced together that the energy in the body, the way it also flows, when freed up, the negative will flow into the positive. Now, the energy isn't destroyed, it just changes its form. And the Mace Energy Method allows the body to do that with the help of the spirit,
Yep.
which no other counseling anywhere that I've seen takes into account anything spiritual. Psychology certainly doesn't. In all the years I spent studying psychology, not once did they mention spirit.
Exactly.
Yep. So when John came up with a spiritual component and saw how the mind and this energetic positive force kind of interact, that was something really monumental to find that the positive energy will absorb the negative energy, and that you guys came up with a way to make that happen. And then once that negative energy is gone, it's gone permanently. It doesn't come back, which is almost hard to believe, because with all these other counseling methods, it never goes anywhere. It still stays there. They come back week after week. I'm still depressed. I'm still feeling awful. I'm still feeling anxious. No, you have another session, you talk about it, and all the causes of, this is why, but it doesn't get it doesn't get rid of the feeling. Matter of fact, I think a lot of times they come out worst because they're just kind of rehashing the same old crap over and over and over again, and it's just kind of charging it up, and it never goes anywhere.
No, exactly. You've triggered me saying that. If I may, I had a young lady came one time, and I explained to her that in a Mace session, you don't have to talk about your problems. We don't need to know anything about your private business. And I've said this before, but she immediately broke into tears, uncontrollable tears. When she calmed down, I said, I'm so sorry. What's happening? What's the matter? I said, have I upset you? She said, no, I'm so happy. I've been going to a psychiatrist for over a year, telling that story every couple of weeks for a year. And I'm so happy I never have to tell it again. And the tears were tears of joy. It wasn't. And I'd like to mention something, Jerry, that you've said. I don't like using the word a cure. It's like, to me, I started using the word delete when I got onto computers. I thought that's what we're doing, is deleting helping you delete your traumas. And I don't know, but people seem very happy. I'm a great one when I'm talking to people or counseling people. Like, I've been teaching communication for 25, 30 years. And like watching people's indicators, I said, if you're watching people, everything you'll say, you'll notice how it lands. And so it's like watching their indicators and that sort of thing, to me, is very, very important. When you say something, you can tell how it's landed if you're watching. If you're talking to yourself, you don't. I used to tell my students, if you're talking to yourself, you won't see it and you'll miss things. But okay, thank you.
Yes. So, that's one thing great about Mace too, and it's hard to believe that the therapist doesn't have to know what the trauma is. And a lot of people don't want to go to a counselor because they don't want to bring up the horrible things that happen to them, especially, women who have been sexually abused or tortured. They don't want to go through all that stuff again. They've already been through it with other counselors a number of other times, and it hasn't done any good. So they're actually relieved when they find out that a Mace therapist doesn't have to know what the trauma was, that they're only interested in the feeling and how they reacted to it.
Yes, yes. Well, that's it. Well, as John said in some of his early writings, he's wrote that that's also good for the person doing the Mace session. They're not having it that, because otherwise, if someone's telling some story, they could trigger the practitioner. You know, they could. No, well, that's what he said. When you're not hearing all that stuff, it's not triggering anything of yours. It's less stressful on the practitioner. Because imagine those old practitioners, when they have to listen to terrible stories, it's sure going to shake up or trigger some of their feelings too, by the way. You know, they might not read anything quite so bad.
And it really doesn't do any good.
No, exactly.
It interferes with getting the work that needs to be done with Mace. But there's some people that just don't believe that you can get rid of that trauma without listening to their story. And they almost have to tell some part of that story. And then once they start off with it, then it's like a waterfall. It just breaks loose and they just start pouring it out. And then it's hard to bring them back and say, okay, now let's get some work done. You know, it's hard for them to believe that a practitioner can, as you say, delete whatever the negative feeling is without knowing what they believe is the cause of it.
Yeah. By the way, I said, I tell them, you'll be able to delete your problems. You know, I can help you do that. There's part of it that you have to do. You have to follow this process without thinking or bringing anything else in while we're doing it. It's actually simple if you don't add anything. I tell them, you know, that was the way that worked very, very good for me.
Yeah, and it's relatively quickly. It's relatively quick. You know, so these people who have, you know, something happened to them when they were 7 years old, and you run the Mace session, and that trauma is gone or deleted, and they're feeling different, and they've been hauling that around for 5-6 decades.
Yeah.
You know? Like, and one of the biggest ones is I'm worthless. Yeah. That comes up time after time after time after time. Imagine living your life with that belief and then having it gone within an hour.
Yep. Yeah, and getting all that energy back. But think how many times they've used that. I had an idea once about when somebody says I'm worthless, it becomes a built-in excuse for failing. You know, that it's always there to use. That sort of when they have a big problem. Oh well, I'm worthless, and that sort of handles it. But like I say, every time they do that, they're given that a bit more energy. It becomes more powerful, in my opinion. If you if they have a negative identity, if they get it out and use it for too long, they're giving it more of their beautiful spiritual energy. Accidentally, by the way.
Yeah, some of those are massive. They're not even aware that they're feeding this thing.
No, they're not even aware that it's there, that it's something that's been created. You know what I mean? Like John said, nobody else can make you angry. You can only create anger yourself. Nobody else can do that for you. And so anything negative they've accidentally created it themselves under pressure. You know, and once again, in lots of cases, it's an excuse for not being successful.
Yeah, and they're not even aware. They're not even aware of it.
Yeah. Yep. There was a little point too that there was some sessions that John did early on that were taped for people to listen to. And I remember somebody started to tell him about their problems. He said, "Don't tell me about that. When we get this done, you can tell me when we're finished if you want to." And we've all got a joke about that. I've used the same terminology in a session, and I've never, ever had anybody want to tell me once the trauma's gone. They don't want to talk about it.
Oh, that's something I'll have to remember. They want to talk about it. They can't conceive that they can, you know, this trauma that they're undergoing can be fixed without the therapist knowing actually what it is. That's just mind-boggling to most people.
Yeah.
Right, and sometimes even the person getting the Mace Energy Method session might not know exactly what the trauma is. because, you know, in really traumatic situations, people black out what happened to them. Of course, they feel the effects, they feel the emotions. They're dealing with that their whole life, but they don't necessarily know what caused it. They could have had some big trauma before they, you know, before they were 5 years old that they don't remember. And Mace Energy Method can still get to that because it doesn't deal with the event. It just deals with the feelings that have been brought forward from that trauma. And so that's really huge too, you know, that that can happen. And like we were talking about earlier, Mace Energy Method isn't just for people with serious mental illness, it's for anyone, because we all have these subconscious beliefs. They're subconscious, so we're not always aware of them, dragging us down one way or another. So if you're not enthusiastic and happy and have lots of integrity, then, you know, there's probably some negative identities in play there, and we can delete those with the Mace Energy Method session. So I would say most people owe it to themselves to have a session, because Jerry had one, John had one, I had one, and, you know, we were all, I was really surprised because I felt like I had done a lot of healing work, emotional healing work, and shadow work. And we know when I came up with that judgment, I thought I'd, you know, released a long time ago, and I did release it, but it would come back. It would come back, and now it's gone for good. And, you know, like Jerry says, it's almost unbelievable, but it's so simple. The process is so simple, but the theories and premises were real detailed. And it's almost, it was like some divine orchestration in play too. You know, the time has come for people to be able to get emotional healing and be who we really are and enjoy this experience that we're having and not feel like we're in some kind of soul trap or hell or something. You know, this can be a great experience, this life, as long as we don't have negative identities running the show.
Yep, exactly. No, people change in front of you. You can see it happen. And
Yeah.
it's like I don't know. I love using an example about that if I can, about changing quickly. And this was, I've said it before, but it's really worth it. That 7-year-old girl that was brought to me very upset, and I handled a couple of feelings. And one of the feelings, when I asked this little girl how she got on with her mother, she said, "Good." I said, "How do you get on with your dad?" And she almost started to shake. She said, "I'm frightened of my dad." And I said, "Oh, but of course that was a feeling to handle." And when we handled a couple of feelings to do with her dad, and I said to this little girl, this took about 20 minutes or 15 minutes, the whole thing. And I said to this little girl, "Okay, we've handled that. Now close your eyes. When you think about your dad, how do you feel about him?" She opened her eyes and stood up and looked at me like I was completely stupid and says, "I love my dad." You know what I mean? And like the difference in that little girl sitting opposite me was just unbelievable. And that's a beautiful example of like completely, like she wouldn't even harbor that idea that anything was wrong with her dad for even a second. Like, what would that do for that little girl's life? You know what I mean?
That's a good point, that Mace Energy Method is effective with children and teenagers. And, you know, just think if people can, you know, do their shadow work, their emotional healing when they're still young before they get married and have their own children, that would change the world in one generation. So it has so much potential and so much power, you know, and thanks to Jerry getting word out here, you know, about Mace Energy Method, it's really starting to get out there to people, and people have access to it. More and more people are becoming practitioners. So many people who have sessions, they want to become practitioners and help other people. So the wave has started, and it's just great. And I'm really excited. I can't wait to have the opportunity to work with some younger people and see the effects there.
You know, I've had people write me saying, "I'm going into psychology. You know, I'm going to study psychology. What do you think?" And I'd write them back and say, "Don't waste your time. You know, go and become a Mace therapist. That will work. Psychology doesn't work." You know,
right? A lot less time, and you don't have all that indoctrination, because, you know, all allopathic medicine, including psychiatry and psychology, is run by the pharmaceutical industry.
yes.
So, you know, people are just, I mean, doctors don't even look at patients. They look at their computer and symptoms, and the computer tells them what chemical to put the person even more out of balance. And then, of course, whatever they prescribe them will need other prescriptions for the side effects. And it just goes on and on and on. And you don't need any of that stuff, none of it. And you don't need to relive the trauma either. It's just so simple and so, just beautiful.
And the deception of the mainstream mental health system is incredible. I mean, it's just incredible. This biochemical imbalance thing that they say, oh, all emotional mental illness or emotional traumas is due to some biochemical imbalance of the brain. It's a complete lie. It was made up by Eli Lilly, a drug company back in the 70s when Prozac came out. Total lie. They knew it was a lie at the time. They went with it anyway. Now they're teaching it in the universities, and they're still teaching it in the universities after it has been debunked over and over and over again to sell drugs. That's why Eli Lilly put it out in the first place, to sell drugs. Their DSM, that Bible of psychiatric illnesses, completely made up. Every single one of those things, there's not a single objective test to test for any one of those mental illnesses. Not a one. They started off with like 157 back in the 50s, and now they're almost up to 300. There's this committee of psychiatrists that get together once every 3 years, and they make these things up. They just make them up, and then they publish them as if they need them for the insurance companies to have, so they have stuff like Paris syndrome. It was like people from, where was it? It was one of the Arab countries who shows up in Paris, and they have this reaction to that culture. In my day, they'd call it a cultural shock. Now they call it a mental illness. They got mathematics disorder. If you don't like math, you're disordered. It's like, I hate math. I'd be one of the first ones on their list. Sibling relational disorder. That's kids fighting. They're disordered. They even have caffeine toxicity disorder. You drink too much coffee, you're disordered. I mean, they just make these things up, and they publish them in this big fancy book that looks like it's scientific with all these numbers and categories and all that kind of stuff. There's nothing. They're all segments of human behavior that they've broken up into segments and pathologized for their own benefit. The insurance companies need that information in order to, they need it when they write these drugs, and these drugs are toxic. I mean, most of those drugs that they're putting out are toxic, especially the antipsychotics. They will rot your brain out with long-term use. They'll turn it into like a shrunken walnut. They don't tell you that. And they'll tell you with schizophrenia, they say, well, that's a lifetime sentence. You got to take these toxic drugs for the rest of your life. And when I was working in the prison, and the prisoners started recovering from schizophrenia, and that was even before I knew anything about Mace, I got in trouble. That shouldn't happen, according to them. They were very threatened by that. And I got in a lot of trouble for that. It's nuts. They don't want anything like Mace out there.
No, that's for sure. I had a young man that had been to Afghanistan, and he'd had a very bad upset, and we handled the trauma. Actually speaking, he did tell me, he's one of the few people that did tell me after the session finished. He was driving an armored vehicle, and his best friend was driving the one in front, and the whole thing got blown up, and he was covered with the guy's blood, his best friend's blood. He was sitting up the top, and like we handled that for him, and like we got him. He was 100%. He just changed overnight and became quite a good friend. John wanted him to give us a testimonial, but he was lined up to get a university course, to get him back into life, and I think he was frightened that he wouldn't get that. If he said he was cured, they wouldn't give him his course, and that sort of thing. and I had the same trouble. I was in a Return Soldiers Club we have here, Jerry. It's called RSL, Return Soldiers Club, and I got friends. I used to be a member of the club. I'd go down there and watch the entertainment and talk to the bosses one day. And I told them about Mace, and I said, if you've got any, we've got some. They had some soldiers there that returned soldiers in bad condition. I said, I'm not looking for money. I was a kid in World War II. I love soldiers. I'll look after them for free. And they said, oh, I gave them a good talk one day. 2 or 3 of them were there, the bosses. Oh, this is wonderful. We'll talk to them. We'll get it lined up for you. Anyway, about a month went past. They had my number and my card and everything, and I didn't get a call. So I went and saw them. They said, oh, we talked to them, but the psychiatrist won't let them come near you. You know what I mean? And it's like they didn't care about the soldiers. Even something could have worked. You know what I mean? They never gave us a chance. So it never happened.
So I ran into kind of the same thing when I was working at a big state hospital, where nobody seemed to know anything about what these voices were telling these schizophrenic patients. And they weren't interested because they felt they knew, because they'd learned in school that they were hallucinations. So that's as far as they went. They weren't curious about what these voices were saying to them, or what these voices were, or how they operated, or anything like that. So I started asking the schizophrenics, what are the voices telling you? And that got up to 2 of the psychiatrists over a different period of time. And I got pulled up in the psychiatrist's office, and he would tell me, he said, you will not ask them any more questions about what their voices are telling them. The voices are hallucinations. And what you're doing by asking questions about them is you're reinforcing those hallucinations, and you're making the patients worse. And they ordered me to stop. They wouldn't even let you look into it.
Yep. Wow. Wow, that's amazing. And that I've got a question, I'm afraid, about that. Now that you have the experience with both methods, do you feel that the voices are coming from negative identities?
Well, you know what? That's something I'm struggling with even now, is because there's some that I felt were, okay, this is a voice. This is an entity, and run the Mace method on it, and it's gone.
Okay?
Yeah. There's others where I think it's a negative identity, and all of a sudden the voices kick up and start screaming in the person's head. They won't let them concentrate. They won't let them form an image. They start telling the guy, hey, don't listen to this guy. He's crazy and he's stupid. And they interfere with it. So what I did see is that virtually all schizophrenics have a lot of trauma, virtually all of them. And Mace will get rid of that trauma. Okay. And it will do it quickly. So what the voices do is they play off that trauma. So if there's one fellow said, well, they hang around in the area where that trauma is, and if anything triggers that trauma, they just pour gasoline on it. Okay? They make it much worse, and then they feed off of that negative emotional energy that comes off of that trauma. And you talk to schizophrenics, and they'll tell you, after the voice is attacked, they don't have any energy left. They're drained. No. And I've had several of them tell me, I can feel my energy leave. When the voices show up, I can feel them leave.
Yeah, well, it's gone into the voices. The voices have got the energy.
Yes, they take it. And, there's one guy I've been working with recently. He's in Canada, where his voices would actually make him retch when we were working with the Mace stuff. When we turn it, when I treat the voices as a negative identity.
Yeah.
Okay? He actually will bend over and start retching.
Wow.
Yeah. So they are negative, but I think they come in from outside. They sound just like the person's thoughts. So you take them on directly, and there's a battle there. But like I said, Mace will get rid of the trauma that they feed off of, and the guy will come out in better shape. Even if the voices are still there, he's going to be in better shape than before.
Yeah, well, he's getting his energy back. Well, John always said that, like, when somebody's angry, they're just acting out a negative identity. And I just think, yeah, I'm not an expert on schizophrenics, but I'm just thinking it's the schizophrenic that it's just acting out the negative identity by talking and saying things like, and putting negative stuff online. This, that, what they're saying, the words they're saying. That would be my thought about it. That it's just another way of acting out a negative identity.
Well, it is a negative identity.
Yeah,
they
definitely.
they hear that voice in their mind. It
Yeah,
sounds just like the thousands of other voices that they hear. It sounds like all the
yeah,
other thoughts they hear. There's no like, oh, you're evil and you need to murder
yeah,
somebody. There's nothing like that. It sounds
yeah,
just like the tens of thousands of other thoughts that go through their mind on a regular day, except the
yeah,
intent. The intent and the content are very different. They're
yeah,
they're they're, they're 100% negative.
yep,
Uh, It's hardly anything positive comes from those voices, and they run these
yeah,
patterns.
yeah.
Okay? So in a
Fair,
way,
fair enough.
in the way you could look at them as a negative identity, but on the far reaching scale, where they have taken over a part of that person. And I've
Yeah,
seen where they've completely taken over these people, and that's
yeah,
very ugly.
yeah,
Where they push the original personality aside and have completely taken over the person. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I got a poem here written by a person who killed four people. Uh, Three of them he shot, and his girlfriend he cut up into a million pieces, and they still haven't found her body. And
Wow.
he's talking about the monster within him.
Yeah. That's some
So
identity.
yes, you can look at it as an identity, but it's like it's like an identity on steroids, a negative identity on steroids that's very threatening and dangerous.
Yeah.
Most negative
Wow.
identities that we work with don't threaten you.
No, no, exactly.
These guys
Well,
will.
it's very simple for me. They're just not being themselves when that's going on. Something
No, they
else is
aren't.
running the show instead of them.
That's right.
It's
Something very devious, something very
yeah,
dark and evil.
yeah,
But you attack it head on, and it becomes very interesting. It becomes a battle. They can't form an image. They can't concentrate. They can't think. They start sweating. Um,
yeah,
they have to stop the session. I mean, it's like whatever that is doesn't like it.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, very, very interesting. You give me a lot to think about. I'm going to think a lot more about that schizophrenia. I haven't had a lot to do with it. I've done the alcoholics, I've done the gamblers and the smokers. Those ones are all piece of cake stuff, as far as I'm concerned. But this sounds a little bit more complicated.
You want me to send you some?
No, it's okay. I've already. No, Jerry, my basic thing that's been going on longer than all of this is my communication work and working with communication. And I'm thinking, if there's voices, that's to do with communication.
That's to do with communication. It's all negative communication. It's
Yeah,
all
exactly.
to generate negative emotional energy. That's where it's all headed.
Yeah,
They want the person upset. They want them angry. They want them fearful. They want them paranoid, and they feed off of that.
yeah. But when people want to communicate something and they keep getting blocked in life, it could sort of go all funny, and then they're wanting to get it out. You know what I mean? If people get quite angry if people won't listen to them. And a lot of people grow up never being allowed to talk.
Yeah.
When we grew up way back in the 40s, when I was growing up, what they say, sit down and be quiet and don't be heard or something. That was something that was said to us along those lines all the time. And there again, you're building negative identities. you know, the person is not going to be happy about that.
Yeah, it's almost like you can't be on this planet without having some kind of trauma. I mean, everybody gets traumatized at some time or another.
Yeah.
And that never gets cleaned out. And then you look at, you know, war veterans. Look at what's happening in you know, over in Ukraine right now. I mean, almost 600,000 killed and millions
Yeah.
traumatized
You're not
with
kidding.
serious images. I mean,
Yeah.
serious injuries. I mean, if Mace was ever needed, it's needed now.
Yeah.
And it will clear out most negative mental health problems within an hour.
Yeah.
And they're gone. They're completely gone. They're no longer there.
Yeah.
And then when the person, you ask them, okay, think back on this situation now, they go, I remember it, but it doesn't trigger me. There's no emotional tie to it. And like you were saying, John, you can watch them change right before your eyes. You know, they come in glum and depressed and, you know, feeling bad. And then after the session, they're like, whoa, you know, what just happened?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, with all this talking, it's triggering things that have happened to me while doing sessions over the years. And one of my favorites was, and I think it's worthwhile, you know, we do somebody's ruin, we get their basic trauma these days, and then you do a relationship repair. I did this on a young lady, and it was like about the middle of the year, about this time of year, June, July. And, you know, a week later, I talked to her and she was good as gold, and off she went. And then just after Christmas that year, the next, you know, 6 months later, she called me and I said, oh, how you doing? I said, have you had a problem? No, not a problem. She said, I went and visited my mother over Christmas and we got on like sisters. That's never happened for the last 10 or 15 years. We generally fight the whole time at Christmas when the family's together. I said, well, you did do a relationship repair when you were here in June. She said, and she rang up virtually. Oh, of course I did. And then she started saying, thank you. But she didn't realize she was changed until she got, you know, she wasn't triggering her mother and her mother wasn't triggering her, and they had a good weekend. And to me, those things, I get a lot of pleasure out of that.
I do too. I had one where the lady, she wrote back and she goes, you saved our marriage.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Or I couldn't talk to my mother in, you know, 30 years and now we're talking and stuff like that.
Yep. And that's it. It makes such a big difference to their whole life. And you know, they've taken control, you know, who's running the show now. And this happens, I did a lot of work with children. And because, as I said before, I did a couple of teachers from a Steiner school. You have Steiner, I think, too, in America.
I've heard of it.
School. Yeah, Rudolf Steiner. It's a special way of educating children. Anyway, the two teachers came and then they told me they had trouble with, we've got a few children we can't seem to handle. Would you do that? And then that's when the children, and then that was way back about 2000. Then I started handling children. And that was a wonderful experience, you know, and I remember one teacher called me. She said, I'll still remember the boy's name. I won't give you his second name. His name was Luke. She said, I've got no idea what you did to Luke. He was totally the worst boy I've ever tried to teach in my life. He's turned into the best boy now. If any other children play up, they've got to sit next to Luke and try to be as good as him. And, you know, that took about half an hour, a few feelings, and the boy was, you know, children are so easy to handle when you get rapport with them and tell them it's a game they want to play, and they say, oh, sure, you know what I mean? I'll show you how to get rid of that. You've got to do what I tell you. You know, you got to follow a process. And they do. Once they like you, they'll do anything you want because they don't get a lot of good attention and intention in life, young children, unfortunately.
Now, I have one testimonial here that I was able to find. I sent most of them to Cherie. You want me to read this one?
Sure.
Please.
It's a little long. Okay. It says.
Oh, okay. It's up to Julie. How's that time doing, Julie?
All good. I'll go as long as y'all can.
Okay.
I got until 5. Well, that's maybe, let me see, what time is it here? It's about 50 more minutes. Here's one I had asked her to write back and let me know how things were going after she finished her last session. She goes, "Hi Jerry, here's my testimonial. Please feel free to use it in whole or part as you see fit. My son had been on antipsychotic meds for over 6 years since he was 19 for a diagnosis of schizophrenia. The last 2 years, he was on injections of 400 milligrams of Abilify a month. Although the medication quieted the voices, it did not really quiet the thoughts. He did, however, sleep much more, hypersomnia, gain a great deal of weight, start to shuffle when walking, and suffered from depression. He still wasn't able to hold a job or school due to impulsive decision making and terrible self talk. I attended some of his bi monthly sessions with his psychiatrist, but there was no therapy or remediation being done at all. I grew increasingly concerned with his physical health, which was not being monitored at all. When I brought up to his psychiatrist my concerns that the medication side effects might be causing his weight gain and other issues, she totally dismissed it and launched into a diatribe about calories in and calories out for the remainder of the session. Not even asking about his diet. Now, this is ridiculous because these drugs do cause people to gain weight. I mean, it's commonly known. And here's a psychiatrist blowing it off.
Yeah.
She goes on to say, I knew he had to get off these medications, but the underlying issues had to be addressed first. Finally, I stumbled on some video interviews by Jerry Marzinsky. He was describing my son's symptoms exactly. My son said he always knew that the voices weren't from him and were from outside, but neither of us realized that they were also the origin of his negative self-talk. Jerry graciously agreed to hold sessions with me and my son. After only a few short months of hard work and literally facing his demons, he is now able to work. He's reduced his meds from 400 milligrams to 15 milligrams a day and is so much happier and at peace with himself and those around him. The information shared with Jerry was invaluable. Now, this also included Mace, about educating us about the true nature of the source of the voices and the negative self-talk. He gave my son actual tools to learn how to use and combat them. And part of that was Mace also. The psychiatrist would have kept him on those horrible drugs for the rest of his life. Everything they said was a lie. It's not an imbalance of the brain. It will not be with him forever. The voices are not hallucinations. The medical mafia literally tried to lock him up in a medically induced prison for his mind for the rest of his life with no chance of parole. They never treated him as an individual or listened to him, what he was saying. He knew all along what the truth was, but it takes two to speak the truth, one to speak, the other to hear. The indifference of the medical community to the truths my son was speaking is nothing short of criminal. So that's just one of many.
Wow.
And that's one where Mace was able to remove a lot of the traumas that this guy had. And there's a lot more of these. I don't know where I put them. I've started saving them in one place, but Cherie has the rest. I sent the rest to her. But yeah, like John was saying, you can see the change within an hour. And it's incredible how fast this stuff works. I mean, it'll get rid of a lifelong trauma in an hour. It's gone.
Yeah, exactly. I've been, you might call it a little bit cheeky when someone has a dramatic change sometimes, and they said, and they tried to get them to repeat the decision and they can't anymore and it's all gone and everything. I've often put my hand over the desk and I said, I said, welcome home, pleased to meet you. They've come back to being themselves. I said, very pleased to meet you. And I emphasize the you.
Yeah. I tell them they're no longer the person they were when they came into the office.
Yeah.
And a lot of them they just don't believe it. They go, well, I'll need to wait a while and see if it comes back. They can't believe that something they'd struggled with for decades is now gone in an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny when we talk about these things. I've had a few favorite stories. I might have told you this before, Julie. I'm sorry if I did, but every time I think about, I had a lady come one time, and then she was very, very happy. And about a month later, she called me. She said her 15-year-old daughter was going to a private school, and she was being bullied badly, and she'd won a scholarship, and they were gonna withdraw the scholarship because her work had gone to trash at school because of the bullying. And I said to the mother, bring her over Friday, after school. So they brought a beautiful young lady. She had a uniform and a tie and the hat. She took it off, and then she came, and we settled her down, and we finished up doing the process, and getting her ruined, and doing relationship repair, and these people that have been upsetting her. Anyway, when she'd finished, like she said, she was feeling bigger than the house. She said, I feel bigger than the house. So I'm just finishing the session. I'm writing a few things down, and I thought, what can I say to this young lady to look after her, herself? I said, listen, she was very obedient sort of a person. I said, listen, I've got something I want you to do in the future. Oh, she said, okay, what's that? I said, in future, when you get any problem, I want you to close your eyes for a second. Remember how big you are. Then you handle the problem, and I bet you get better results. And she looked at me. She said, okay. And I didn't see her for quite a long time. Her mother used to sell vitamins, and I went there. I'm a bit of a nut. I'd take a few. And I went there one night, and the girl was there, and I finally got her on her own. And I said, how you been doing? It was a few months later. And she said, oh, wonderful. She said, anytime I get a problem, I just close my eyes now. She said, I can do anything. When she said that to me, she nearly bowled me over with the energy. I can do anything, she said.
Wow.
So I use that quite a bit with young people, remember who you are. I just thought you might find a use for that one day. and she got on. A few months later, I see a big write-up in the paper, her and a friend had raised all this money for charity. and I said, that's my girl. Beautiful kids.
Good one.
Yeah, well, I just thought that might be something children.
Right. Most people think that they're negative identities, they think they're a bad person because they behave certain ways, but it's not them. The real person, the real spiritual being there is a very good person, very, very good entity, yeah. I should say, energy. So yeah, we all think we're our negative identities, and we're not. So when we get rid of them, wow, it's just a whole fresh take on life.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. When you're just being yourself. Well, once again, like John said, to help you take control of your life and enable you to live your own dreams. Do what you want to do. And that's the whole game of life.
So John, this is an energetic therapy. It's very different from any other kind of therapy.
Yeah.
It works with energy. It works with the flow of energy.
Yeah.
What can you tell the audience about that?
What about energy? Well, that's who you are. We are a being, or spiritual beings, and I'll just quickly, I'll answer your question, but I'll just quickly answer one thing about John Mace. He said we're beings. He never used the spiritual thing very much, and he wrote something early on that's quite entertaining. And he grew up with a grandmother looking after them, and she was very, very spiritual, churchy sort of person. And when his friends were going to the movies, we used to have, when we were going, John's only a few years older than me, and when we're going to the movies, we'd go Saturday afternoon there was a special cheap movies for the kids, and he said he wrote a thing about his grandma being so churchy, and when he tried to get a few sixpence or 6 pennies or a shilling or 10 cents to go to the movies, grandma would say, you can't go to the movies. Jesus didn't go to the movies. Why should you? And he said, no wonder I've been a little bit touchy about church and that in my life, So I think that's why he used the word beings. But anyway, but the energy, it's like, that's who we are. We are an energy being. That's another way of saying it, when we're feeling good, we feel big as a house. We can do anything. When we're feeling bad, we feel as big as small as a mouse. It's like we are the energy, and it's what we do with it, where we put it. And that's what John discovered accidentally. We're putting this energy into negative things from traumas, and it gets stuck there. And any little thing reminds you of it, you know, and then that negative energy starts to play out. A negative energy, a negative identity is just a bunch of energy acting itself out, the negativity out. And when they're all gone and you delete them and you get all your energy back, well, then you've got all the energy and you're thinking completely different thoughts, you know?
Yeah, I kind of tell them it's like a computer virus working in the background.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, it's like a virus. That's why I've used the word delete. It's like a virus. I've used that terminology. These things are like a virus in the computer. They make you do the wrong things and make you do mistakes and do things you regret and cause you problems. And when they're gone, you're in charge. You know.
And what it feels like is you get into a jam, and I've had this happen to me a bunch of times when I was younger. Get into a jam and you go, I'm never going to get into this situation again. You know, I'm sick of it. This has already happened 3 times. And then you determine you're not going to get, and then, you know, step by step, decision by decision, 6 months later, there I am right back in the same situation again. You know, it's like, what is doing that? Why do I keep ending up here? Like you said, it's a negative identity that is running that making decision by decision by decision, and it's not even noticeable. It's not like you could go, oh, I'm making this little decision, and that's leading to this next little decision. I mean, you're not even aware of them.
No, that's exactly right. Like we have positive identities and negative identities, and like my thoughts are like, when you're learning to drive, where's the gear stick? Where's this? Where's that? You're all nervous. But years later, you're driving along, listen to the radio, watching this. The red light goes on in front. You don't think, your foot just goes on the brake automatic. And like they're positive identities doing good things. But the negative ones are the same. You just react immediately when you get triggered. When something little thing reminds you of something, you're back in it again. You know, but once it's gone, that doesn't happen anymore. You don't get triggered.
Yeah, it's like when the person goes through a bad trauma. They say their father was brutal and sadistic. You know,
yeah,
that trauma gets locked in there, and it stays there. I mean, it's a negative identity caused by the father unconsciously during the traumas. So what happens is anytime somebody who reminds you of that father shows up in your psychic field, there's a negative reaction. And it's either a fight or flight reaction. You either fight with that person, or you avoid them, or you run from them. But in every case, it causes an upset. And every time that upset goes off, it strengthens that negative identity and gets you in trouble one way or the other. You know, you're either upset or you get into a fight with this other person and they're upset. But that causes more angst. That causes more negativity.
Yep.
So, like you say, Mace can go in there and delete that, and it's gone. So you don't react to these kind of people anymore. It's more a response. You have a more logical response to them than a uproar. Like, oh, I don't. It's like somebody you hate. They don't even have to open their mouth. You can feel them, and you go, I just don't like this guy from the way he looks.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. See, the most powerful thing in the mace is getting what we call somebody's ruin. Like somebody said that, like, I'm useless. If somebody decides I'm useless when they're young, how many upsets would that cause by the time they get, say, 35 years old? How many times would that be triggered? Like, I'm useless. And when we find somebody's ruin, the cause of the problem, that's why John used the word causalism for the book. When you handle that, you've handled, how many upsets have you handled when you delete the cause of the problem, and all those ones that have followed afterwards, the whole lot of them have all gone in one hit. That's why, to me, why it's so dramatic when you see people change dramatically right in front of you. You know, they become more themselves and that sort of thing. So how many upsets? You could have handled a couple of hundred upsets all in one hit, when you handle the cause of the problem. And that's why talking about problems has no therapeutic effect whatsoever.
Yeah, and you can see the change in their demeanor when that's gone.
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
it's like they have to figure out who they are now that's gone. They have more energy, and I notice a lot of times they're feeling weird after a session because that negative energy is now gone that they believed was a part of who they were or what they actually were, because they believe after those things are triggered for thousands of times, like you say, they get to believing, well, that's just who I am. I don't like these kind of people, and that's all there is to it. I just need to stay away from them. When they show up, I need to get out of there or fight them back or do something. But it's upset after upset after upset, and each time it's like the car battery, where you just charge up that car battery with each time that it goes off, and it gets stronger and stronger. They believe that's who they are, and then you remove that, and they're like, okay, who am I now? They're kind of like dazed. It's interesting to watch their reaction after, and it's also kind of sad because that thing ruined their life. They made a decision when they were 7 years old that they were worthless and stupid, and they believed that for decades. So here's a person now 60, 70 years old living that out for all that time, and realized, okay, it wasn't true. It was a lie.
Well, it's gone, and they don't entertain it anymore. They don't get stuck into that energy anymore. It's negative energy gone, and they're not in it anymore. They're not acting it out. It's just not being them. They handle things completely different. Yep. No, it's very interesting.
Yeah, they're a different person.
Yeah.
And a better person. They're more who they are.
They're more real.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, that sounds pretty good to me, Julie. How are we doing?
Sounds good. Yeah, this has been great stuff. And y'all both touched on how it helps with compulsive behavior like alcohol, gambling, smoking. And Jerry was saying earlier he was surprised that he had someone that was an alcoholic that was able to go back to just drinking socially, moderately. And, the AA and the NA people probably won't like that either. But that's really phenomenal because everybody's always, with alcohol and drugs, they're like, oh, I have to give it all the way up, especially alcohol since it's so socially acceptable. And even gambling, like you had that story, John, about the one lady. So yeah, it's amazing how many things this touches on. And once the negative identities are gone and the person can be the real them, the real spiritual energy being, then all kinds of opportunities open up in their life because they're coming from a whole new perspective and a whole new energy. And we all know it's about frequency and vibration. Everybody talks about vibes. And that's what this does. It brings you to an optimal frequency, the right vibration. So life just flows for you. And people say after a session they get the first parking spot, things like that. Little things, the world just kind of opens up for them. And that's just it's nothing short of miraculous, but it really does work.
Yeah, if you have that negative energy and you attract more of it. You're more aware of it, and you kind of pull it toward you.
Yep. You've got the thing. John told me something very early on about an alcoholic that he'd fixed up, and the guy, it was 6 months or so later, the guy called him. He said, "I've got a problem. Can I come back?" And John said, "Yes. What's the problem?" And the guy was a big businessman, and he said, "I was signing up this deal the other day with this man, and he gave me a little shot of whiskey, and we're in the middle of signing a big deal, and I felt if I didn't drink it, I might not get the." He said, "So I've actually had a little drink of whiskey." And John said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, I'm an alcoholic." He said, "Did you drink any more? Have you drank since?" He said, "Oh, no." John said, "What's the problem?" And he sent him away. He said, "You know what I mean? Asked him who's in control." I think I've told you my one, Julie, about the lady that Oh no, she was a gambling lady. That I had a lady once. She'd lost 46,000. Just an elderly lady. She'd lost $46,000 gambling on the poker machines. So we handled that for her. And when she called back, like I get them all to call back in a week to handle any little things they need as part of the session. And when she called back, she said, "I can't believe it. I can still go to the club. I can still mix with my friends, and I play a couple of games at Keno for $1 or $2, but I have not the slightest idea, slightest urge to go anywhere near the poker machines." But the poor dear had already lost $46,000 on the pokies. And like smoking, people with smoking just the same, but I had a rule when I was processing about smoking. If somebody came and said they wanted to give up smoking, I'd say, "Why do you want to give up?" "My wife doesn't like it." I said, "That's not good enough." And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Look, when you're ready to give it up for you, give me a call. The door's always open. I'm always here." And sometimes they'd come back in a few months. "Well, I've got to get rid of this. It's not doing my health any good." I said, "Sit down." And then you'd go ahead and handle it for them and that sort of thing. But they've got to want to. And that's the only thing about Mace, if anybody wants a session, whether it's children or what, they've got to be willing. You can't force anyone.
Yeah.
I can give you lots of examples about that. A lady brought a 14-year-old to me one time, and he has sat there with his arms crossed. We had a talk outside before I took him in the office, and we're talking, and he said, I brought him down for a session. "I'm not having a session," the boy said. He was a 14-year-old. He was snapping and she'd driven him about 100 kilometers to get to my office. And I said to him straight out, I said, "I'm not going to give you a session because your mother says, because your mother said she wants you to have one. You only get a session here if you want it." And finally I got him. It took about 30 or 40 minutes to talk him. And I finally said to him, I said, "You've come a long way. You might as well find out what we do before you go home." So finally said to his mother, "Yeah, I will have a session with John." And I said, "Well, Mum, you can go up the street and have a coffee. We'll give you a call when we're finished." And, a week later, she said, "I couldn't believe he's the same boy. He was helping with the washing up." They didn't have a dad. And he hasn't had a fight with his sister the whole week, and everything was fine. I said, "See you later." It's like, it fixes them up. And that's the big thing about it. Puts them back in control of their game.
Yeah, so it's almost like magic. I mean, I watch these transformations happen in front of me. It's almost like magic. I mean, I've never seen anything like it before, ever. And you're right. I have a lot of people who's like mothers saying, "Oh, I want a session for my son or my daughter or my sister or something like that." I always write them back. I said, are they wanting a session? To make sure you can't do anything with somebody who doesn't want the help.
Absolutely,
no matter
not.
what.
Yep, that's an absolute fact, and sometimes you have to talk them around a little bit, do a bit of selling. No, I tell everyone it's the best fun I've had in my whole life. You know what I mean? And I never started till after I actually retired, from regular work. That's when this started. I just retired. And so that the last 20, 25 years that I've been doing it, that's a lot of fun that I've had. But I have given up now. I don't feel I'm able to concentrate that long, getting a bit long in the tooth, as they say in Australia. But if I can help the young ones, I'm more than willing and love to give them a bit of encouragement.
And what's so good about this system is, I don't know how long it usually takes, 6 months or so. I took my time because I wanted to really dig into it. But you don't have to have a college education to do this.
No.
You don't have to have a master's degree. You don't have to have a PhD. And there were a couple of psychologists that Cherie was talking about who took the Mace training and went, "Where's this been? How come they're not teaching this in the schools?" Didn't you and John go up to the university and try to convince them to use this instead of the garbage that they were teaching?
Yeah, no, John went to the university, He wanted to give it to the university in West Australia. He wasn't into making $1 million or anything. He was just so happy that he called it the pot of gold at the end of his rainbow. And he was so happy. And he gave a great big talk at the university one day about what we were doing and read out some success stories. And some psychiatrists stood up and said, "That's impossible. You can't do that. That can't be done." And John's only answer was, prove I'm wrong. But they never tried to.
No.
So nothing became of it.
Well, it is a threat to psychology and psychiatry.
Of course
Because what they're doing doesn't work. You know, they're not going to like this. They're not going to like this stuff out there.
Yep. I gave out a whole. I got a whole bunch of the books called "Don't Think About an Elephant," and I gave them to a library in New South Wales. And I gave them enough. I said, "How many libraries are in your area?" There was about a dozen. And some years later, I got a call from a lady. "I've just read this book." She said she'd been a headmistress at a school. She would have she would have been retired, this woman. And so she said she'd been going for about 2 years for depression, you know. And we gave her one session, and she was right. On a Saturday and on the Wednesday, she had to go to on the Wednesday, she already had an appointment. She said, I thought I'd keep it. And I went along, and she wrote me a letter, and she said, I told the lady my depression was gone. She said, she looked at me incredulously. She said, but after about 15 minutes, she realized that her depression had gone. And she said she wanted to know all about you and what was the name of the book, and wrote everything down. You know what I mean? And I still talk to her occasionally. We're friends on Facebook, and she's still doing fine. You know what I mean? Handling life, getting on with the business, and that took less than 2 hours. It's an hour and a half to 2 hours. You know what I mean? And the whole thing's gone. And no, you're right, Jerry. It's so quick and so simple if they follow the procedure. Sometimes you've got to be a little bit bossy with love. That make sure they're not thinking on the side and trying to work it out themselves, because that stops everything working.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I tell them if I think they're doing that. I think I've used that example before about people that trying to figure things out, analyze everything. If when I'm doing introduction, if I think they're analyzers, I said, "Do you often do that? Has it ever solved a really important problem?" And they said, "No, not really." I said, "So leave it on the desk while we do this. You can take it home if you want to." I said, "Leave the analyzer here," and I point to my desk. You can take it home afterwards.
Yeah, that's a good idea, because I see them doing the same thing, and it really gums up the works. You know, when they're trying to figure out what's happening, because they can't. You know, they don't know what's happening.
Yeah,
you know, it's happening, but they're following the process. They don't know why it's working or how it's working. All they can feel is that it's working.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
even before the images are gone, a lot of them are going, "Oh, I feel lighter already."
Yeah.
So it's
John Mace didn't take fools gladly, and when people have said, he said, "Oh, I can't be bothered with them. They're trying to work it out themselves." He said, "If they could have worked it out themselves, they could have done it at home. What if they come to me?"
That's a captain in him.
Yeah, the captain.
Yeah, he doesn't want any nonsense.
Every time I think of him, I think of the day I was over there. I've told Julie before, and he was stamping up and down the passage, making a big noise. And I said to his wife, "We've got to get rid of that captain identity one day." And she said, she put her hands together like this. She said, "Please." He come along, "What are you two talking about?" So I told him. I said, "We're going to do that one day." He said, no, he just laughed He laughed. I could get away with murder with him. We were
so
good mates.
He didn't want to get rid of the captain identity.
No.
He was hanging on to that one, huh?
Yeah. Some of the early practitioners were often said to me, "Gee, he's very abrupt and quick." I said, "Yeah, he's a ship's captain." I said, "Who questions the ship's captain?" And they said, "Oh my God, nobody." I said, "You've got it. Stop worrying." But I knew him personally. He's the biggest softie I've ever met. He had this captain identity, but he handled things. But underneath, he was a big softie.
Well, he would have had to be to put this together. So how long did it take you guys to piece this together? Because it came in pieces. I mean, you were looking for a solution to psychological problems that would work, and you were at it over a period of years. How
Yeah,
long did it?
we both started counselling in the mid '60s. We both did the same sort of training in the '60s, and then and I used to see him, backwards and forwards. I moved. I went to America in the late '90s and lived there lived there till the mid '70s, and before I came back. And every time we met, we'd say something's missing. We've got to find it. It just became it. But John actually found it absolutely for sure, and that's how it happened. And that happened in about 97, 98. That happened at the end of the year '97. And that's when he had the big realization. And then, to answer your question, and then, as I said, we started running the ruin on people, and then he said about the relationships, and then it took about three years. We had relationships, and then I had a big thing about the activity procedure or productivity procedure. Then we added that, and then we started handling. He started putting in the bits. It was slowly written up, and then the course sort of got going very early in the 2000s. Then we started training people and that sort of thing. So, as the problem showed up, then a process using the same method, handling the feelings connected with things came up, and then the drugs and John went into the jail in Perth and did a lot of work on young people. He got permission to go in there and had quite good success too. So it was just a matter of trial and error and putting a process together. And then the course slowly got built, and then we started training people.
But one of the big epiphanies was that the mind only ability is to create images or whatever the being focuses on. That was a big, huge discovery by John, right?
Absolutely. As he said, your mind, it's you, the being, who remembers to drive the car, and you, the identities, the positive ones you built. It's you that knows things. You know what I mean? He said, John used to make a statement: we know absolutely everything. We don't know that we know. He said, we already know these things, and it's just you, the being, that's running the show. You know what I mean? The body's just where you're living, as far as I'm concerned. You've got to look after that.
This is a spiritual component that, or John called it the being, that no other psychotherapy takes into account. And we're spiritual beings. If you don't take into account the spiritual being that lives in this body, you're not going to get anywhere. And they haven't gotten anywhere.
No, exactly. No, that's where all the power is. The good power and the bad power, it's absolutely right. And your mind just makes pictures. He says your mind doesn't remember things. It's you, the being, that learns things and remembers things and does things. It's you that does all the positive things, the people that have invented things and done things. It's the being doing that. The mind's just, as I said, the most simple explanation I found is your mind is, how do people invent things? They keep thinking about things and seeing pictures, and they put things together and they invent things. That's the positive side of it.
So, John being a ship captain, he needed to know about electricity, he needed to know about magnetism, he needed to know about navigation.
Yeah.
He needed to know all these things. So with all these things in his background, those all were useful in putting these things together. So
absolutely,
he started talking about wires that have electricity running through them. There's a field around those wires.
Yep.
You can't see it, but it's there. So there's a field around us, since we're electrical also. We're he's talking about the flow of energy. So he's talking about the spirit or the being as being very positive spiritual energy, and these negative identities being negative energy. So
Yeah.
what he figured out is if you can get the negative energy to flow or be absorbed by the being, that it will transform that negative identity or that negative energy into positive energy, and
Yeah.
and just absorb it, and it'll be gone. So we're
Yeah.
talking again about vibration,
Yep.
frequency, and
Exactly.
vibration.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Well, John was an expert on all that stuff. As you said, he's ship's captain and navigation. That was a very good background. So he understood energy very, very well, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yes. So it's not destroying the negative energy, it's taking it and converting it back to positive energy. So that's when these guys have done the session, they can feel that extra energy there, and that negative energy is no longer dragging them down.
Yeah. Well, imagine the being's got 100 units of energy, and he's accidentally given 50 to an angry identity. So he's only got 50 left, and there's 50 over there. And the more he uses the angry one, the smaller he gets, and the more powerful it gets. So all he's doing is bringing that energy back to where it belongs. That's what I said. It's like getting a bad investment back from the bank, getting all your money back so you can start again. That's the way it's always been real to me.
Yeah, and it takes energy to keep that stuff buried in the subconscious also. I mean, it's wanting to break out, because when it's buried, it's not buried dead, it's buried alive.
Yeah.
And it's triggered by things that happen in your universe. It's wanting to break out of there. It's wanting to get out.
When you're resisting it, you're keeping it alive.
You're keeping it alive, and it takes energy to do that.
Yeah, you're putting your spiritual attention on it. You know what I mean?
So that feeds
that's very, very powerful. You know what I mean? Our attention is very, very powerful where we put it and what we do. That's to do with my communication stuff, which I've been using for years. It's like rapport with another being is only you giving them all your energy. And what we discovered with that communication was that attention follows attention. You know what I mean? And you can prove that easy. Just walk in a room and look at the ceiling, and all the people sitting there, their attention will go straight to the ceiling. Whether their eyes go or not, their attention goes there. And when two people give each other full attention, that's a feeling of rapport, a relationship of like mutual trust, and that sort of thing. So for me, that all ties in with this, and is very, very important with very, very important when you're being a practitioner, to understand, that you're giving all your attention to the client when you're working with them. That makes it work a lot better. I'm sure you understand that anyway. You've been doing it for years.
Yeah. So what I'd like to urge anybody watching this video, if you're thinking about going to a psychiatrist and getting these toxic drugs, I mean, in the psychiatrist's offices are, they're like 6 months waiting time for people to get in there and take these toxic drugs. Please go to causisminstitute.com. I think it's www.causism, CAUSISM institute.com, and find yourself a Mace therapist there before you start taking these toxic, poisonous drugs that the psychiatric mafia is selling at a horrendous price. They did autopsies on long-term patients who took these antipsychotic drugs in the state hospitals, and they found their brains were shrunk like walnuts. These drugs are toxic. They're toxic. They will absolutely, with long-term use, destroy your brain. And of course, psychiatry and the psychiatric mafia and big pharma goes, "Oh no, it's not our drugs. It's not our drugs. It's the schizophrenia doing that." And the lab guys went, "Okay, well, then we'll start feeding these things to rats and monkeys and mice and see what happens." Their brains were also shrunk like walnuts. So these
Yeah.
drugs are toxic with long-term use. Now, you won't hear that from psychiatry. You won't hear that from the drug companies. But you look at the side effects of these drugs and you'll see that they're toxic. They don't cure anything. All they do is treat symptoms.
Yep.
Same way with psychology. They don't get to the cure or the cause like causism does, like the Mace system does.
No,
They don't
exactly.
get to the cause. They just treat the symptoms.
Yep. That's for sure.
Okay, I'm
Yep.
coming. I got to blow out of here. My wife is pointing at the watch and pointing at me.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys both so much. And you can find us all on the Causism Institute website, all three of us. And Jerry's in Arizona. I'm in Portugal. And Jerry has jerrymarzinsky.com, right, Jerry?
Right. But you can go to my website there. There's a lot of information there.
Right. And yeah, and like we said earlier, is for anybody that has anything they don't like about themselves that they really want to change, Mace Energy Method. And actually, if you have other people that you don't like things about, you can change things with you where you can deal with those a lot better. So it's a win-win. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. And yeah, keep up the good work, Jerry. And John, you're just amazing, 93 and still going here, sharing all this wonderful information. And you know, he's here for the practitioners to give us advice. And so, yeah, again, just thank y'all both so much.
You're more than welcome.
Exactly.
All right, everyone,
Okay.
thanks for listening.
Somebody made a quick suggestion the other day when they knew I was 93. That they said, "Did you say 39?" I said, "That sounds better. I think I'll use that."
There you go. 39.
Alzheimer's is not all bad. When people ask you your age, you say, "Look, don't tell anyone I've got a bit of Alzheimer's. I've forgotten." You're as old as you feel.
You're looking great at 93. You're looking great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Amazing. All right, everyone.
Wonderful, Jerry, and thank you for all your good work, Jerry and John Mace. He'd be coming to America to shake your hand if he was here. I can absolutely guarantee you.
I wish I could have met him.
And thank you, Julie. Yeah, don't worry. We think about him a lot. I think he's around tapping us on the shoulder sometime.
Yeah, I think he is. I wish I could have met him. It would have been a treat.
Yeah. So
you guys
I feel very honored. We spent a lot of time together. He was so gorgeous. When I wouldn't get a computer, anything new, he'd write it and send it to me. He said, "For God's sake, get a computer so I can send things to you." Go crook at me. Okay, thank you, Julie. We mustn't keep you going. I better let Jerry go.
All right, guys. All right. And thanks everybody for listening, and have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. And remember to stay focused on what you want and get you a Mace Energy Method session as soon as possible. All right, guys. Thanks again. Ciao, ciao.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.